Hey, Nykytyne, thanks for your response. I wasn't, to clear up something, I wasn't saying that scientific reductionism as a epistemological method for gaining a certain kind of knowledge about the material world or the observable empirical world, I wasn't criticizing that. What I was really criticizing is the larger sort of cultural attitude and trend which has been developing really throughout all of human history, you could say. This trend, this cultural trend, is toward an increasing separation between the human being and the natural world. It began, it's almost, as you put it, the result of human nature. But the thing is, that's almost a contradiction in terms. If you're going to distinguish Homo sapiens from the rest of the species on this planet, you're doing so because, not only as we classify other species because they can reproduce with one another and not with members of other species, but Homo sapiens, it's the wise animal. The animal that is capable of classifying the rest of the animals, and not only classifying them, but controlling them, having some sort of dominion over them. This is expressed in our technological manipulation of the natural world and in our theological conceptualization. And so scientific reductionism as a method of gaining a certain type of empirical, quantitative, usually, knowledge of the world is a result of this larger cultural tendency to evolve towards a more and more stark separation between what we consider to be human and what we consider to be natural. And this is expressed in all sorts of different ways. When it comes to the metaphysics underlying scientific reductionism, which again would just be a method, would be something like Descartes' mind-body dualism. And, I wouldn't demonize Descartes. He's just expressing in a fresh way for 17th century mind a truth, a cultural truth, which had been originally articulated, by Plato and Aristotle in ancient Greece. It's a trend which runs deep in our species' history, our cultural history. And so I'm not blaming science for it. I would understand science and technology and industrialization as interrelated components of what has allowed this basic human attitude to distance ourselves from nature to increase its rate of evolution, of transformation, of complexification, and that itself is not only natural to our species in particular, but to our whole universe. It's always reaching certain points where there is a discontinuous leap to a higher state of order, and in that leap, there is great destruction and great creation. A good example of this is how heavier elements are created as the result of supernova explosions. So the death of a star, the complete collapse of what had been a stage of order, produces a yet more complex state of order. Humans have so colonized the entire living community of the earth that natural selection is no longer the operating force. It's not what's in charge. It's all human selection. Now, we decide the fate of every creature which remains on the surface of this planet, at least until we go extinct, because we are encroaching upon all of their habitats. We are cutting down, the Amazon rainforest at a staggering rate. We're completely decimating the population of fish in all of our oceans. Africa is basically a zoo. There are certain protected areas, but there are still poachers and whatnot. But these areas are slowly shrinking, and if if Africa is ever granted the wish that the rest of the global community is, supposedly offering it, that being development, then of course every species is going to go extinct. I mean, all primates are facing extinction. 90% of lions, the lion population has disappeared over the last 100 years. There's all kinds of other statistics, and they're all bad. Not only bad, but shockingly, extremely disconcerting. Like, the trends for the next 5, 10, 25, 50 years, I think E.O. Wilson, who's one of the most well-respected and renowned biologists in the world, has predicted that if current trends continue, by 2100, half of all species on Earth now will be extinct. Which would be, it would classify at that point as being the 6th mass extinction which has taken place on this planet, though this time, rather than an asteroid or, the explosion of a mega volcano, it would have been caused by human activity, by the attempt of intelligence to emerge on the surface of what had been a living planet, but not yet capable of self-awareness and self-evolution. Now, of course, you could argue that human beings aren't that aware at this point because we are oblivious to the ecological catastrophe that we have brought to the earth and continue to bring to the earth. Our economy, our capitalistic growth economy has recently collapsed. We're scrambling to figure out a way of fixing it. And this is an interesting sign. I mean, what does this mean? Does this mean that, that what has failed is the cosmology that we have been participating in for the last few hundred years, the Industrial Revolution? And, a cosmology doesn't always have to be conscious. We can be unconscious about the cultural assumptions we're making, the conceptual assumptions we're making about the way reality is. Part of waking up is being explicit about your cosmologizing, being conscious of your cosmology. And that's a step that many people still have to make. Most people's cosmology is mythic, in that they are embedded in a universe where there are human personalities in charge of their fate, their destiny, and so they're at the whim of these powerful forces that they have to appease in some way by believing whatever sort of crazy doctrines and dogmas. And so, a scientific cosmology would be one in where the forces in charge of the universe are not so extremely anthropomorphic. They're still, in a sense, something imagined by the human mind, and their forces. They possess some sort of agency, but these are more abstract agencies that we can understand, agencies which obey certain knowable formulas. So science is really, in a sense, it's a more complex mythology, but it's an increase in our consciousness of our situation in the universe. But of course, it at the same time that it has made us more conscious, as I said, scientific progress is a result of this increase in separation between consciousness and the earth. And so there's a further step, I think. Not only do we have to become aware of our cosmos, but we have to participate in it. And knowing about it scientifically isn't enough to do that for us, which is where, spirituality comes in, which is, at the end of the day, it's an integration of the function that religion used to serve and the function that science now serves. It's an integration of meaning and value and facts. In a sense, it's the human being coming to be responsible for its own situation and that of the universe based on the facts. There's a theologian named Michael Dowd who wrote a book called Thank God for Evolution, and he says something. He has this phrase that science is public revelation, whereas the sort of stuff that's written in the Bible is private revelation. This is the expression of a few prophets who had this experience, this inner experience that they tried to share with people. And obviously this message resonated with a lot of people. In the case of the major religions which have been handed down to us to this day. But it's a different kind of revelation than science, which is public and which everyone, if they only would look through the telescope, so to speak, should be able to recognize and accept, to see, and to grasp. So, before we can begin to re-spiritualize our human existence on the earth, we've obviously got to understand it scientifically. And you're right that most of the population of this planet isn't even there yet. And so the problem is, though, we don't have that much time to evolve. And people who watch a lot of my videos may assume that I'm supposed to be more hopeful about this situation than your average intelligent person. Like me in comparison to Gary in Mendham, who's much more pessimistic. But I don't really disagree with people like Gary and people like you, Nick, who are also sort of pessimistic about human beings. I realize that we may fail, because if life is something that is pretty common throughout the universe, at least relatively speaking, that there are thousands, if not millions, of other planets with life in our galaxy, and among those maybe 1/5, 1/10 eventually become intelligent life. And I'm sure that on some of these planets with intelligent life, there have been civilizations which destroyed themselves. Maybe we're one of those. But I think there are some planets with intelligent life, maybe, 1/50th of them perhaps, that do survive, and that displaying the same sort of creativity that we can observe in the 13.7 billion years prior to the emergence of intelligent life, at least based on the timeline on our planet with us, that intelligent life is capable of creating, manifesting a sort of reality which we would only be capable of referring to as spiritual. So the trend is you begin with some sort of quantum foam. After the Big Bang, you eventually get electricity and light, and then you get hydrogen, and then you get stars. They go supernova, you get solar systems, and then from this material stuff that is formed into planets, you get life, and then life complexifies, gains a nervous system, and then becomes mind. It becomes cultural and symbolic, and no longer evolves based solely on its biology. And then what would come after mind? You could only say soul or spirit, and so I think there's hope for something we can only begin to imagine in our current state, but there's no guarantee that we will be able to attain that. So it's a possibility, which is all I would ever say. I can't predict the future, and the situation is pretty dire.